Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, the fight to free a Palestinian-American teen from an Israeli prison.
That U.S. citizenship didn't help him much. He was still there for 9.5 months.
Mohammed Ibrahim was 15 when Israeli soldiers arrested him in the occupied West Bank. What did it take to free him? And why are there so many other Palestinian children still behind bars? I'm Natasha del Toro, and this is The Take. Hi. Before we continue with today's show, please remember to leave us a comment and let us know what you think about today's episode and what kinds of stories you want us to do next. And if you're on the podcast app, let us know where you're listening from. And while you're there, don't forget to give us a 5-star review. It helps people find the show.
My name is Zeyad Kadur. I'm Mohammed Ibrahim's uncle. I live in Brevard County, Florida.
Zeyad, it's such a pleasure to have you here with us on The Take. I'm actually in Florida as well, not too far from you. So
Not too far, yeah.
Not too far. Why don't you tell us where your family is from originally and the connection to Florida?
So our family's originally from Al-Mazar al-Sharqiyya, which is a village, or now a town, on the northeast side of Ramallah in the West Bank. We grew up in Florida, and we kind of have like a tradition where our parents send us back home at a certain age to learn the language, the culture, the religion, and to see the family members who aren't here in the States. I was there from 1992 to 1996, and I go back every couple of years and visit. And generations before us were doing that.
Now, the U.S. connection is really significant because Mohammed was released last week after being arrested by the Israeli military in the occupied West Bank. And he was held in prison there for 9 months. I know that no one in the family was allowed to visit him, but that you were able to video with him right after he got out. What was that moment like?
We cried. The very beginning, it's my first time seeing him in 9.5 months. He had no idea what we were doing here for him, how hard we were advocating and how hard we were, pushing, congressmen and senators. He was basically social media famous, and, he had no idea.
Yeah, I've seen videos as well of him. And I'm curious what Mohammed was like before all of this happened, before he went through this.
Oh, Mohammed was a really, really nice kid. He was very smart. He was really business savvy. He was always looking how to buy stuff and sell things. He loved cars. He was really into cars. His PlayStation, every 15-year-old. But he was a very loving kid. So, when he was taken that morning on February 16th, he was asleep. The blankets came off and he was zip-tied, blindfolded, and taken out to a vehicle at gunpoint by 25 masked men. So as you can imagine, for anybody, that's a traumatic experience.
So you're telling me that this sort of happy, family-oriented 15-year-old kid's life basically came to a screeching halt, right? He and 3 other young people were arrested for allegedly throwing rocks at Israeli settlers' vehicles. Now, I think it's important to mention that this is coming all at a time when the UN says that Israeli settler violence in the occupied West Bank is at an all-time high. There have been more than 1,000 settler attacks this year alone, and as we're going to talk about a little bit later, your own family is part of that statistic. But maybe you could tell us a little bit more about Mohammed's arrest. I mean, you were saying that he was blindfolded. What happened that night?
So February 16th at 3:30 in the morning, there was a knock on the door, or pounding on the door. His father, got up and went to go check on it. And it was the IOF, the Israeli occupying forces. So the IOF were knocking on the door, and he opened the door and they asked who was home. He said, my wife, my daughter, and my son. They said, what's your son's name? He said, Mohammed. They said, where's his room? He said, he's over there, he's asleep. They said, we need to see him. So the father showed them where the room was. They opened the door. They said, we need to take him. They had surrounded his bed. They picked him up. They zip tied his arms. They blindfolded him. And, they carried him out at gunpoint.
A kid, a 15-year-old.
A petite 15-year-old. You'd think he was 13 if you saw the photos of him before they took him. They throw him in the Jeep. That was February 16th. From February 16th till Thanksgiving Day, Thursday, nobody in his entire family has seen him, spoken to him, not even a photo, not a FaceTime visit, nothing.
Honestly, as you're describing that, I get chills because I just think about this poor kid being in that situation and what a nightmare it must have been for him and also for his family, right? Who wasn't able to talk to him. How is he doing now?
He's doing better. We're getting him IV treatment. We're slowly feeding him. He can't really eat solids yet. His stomach has shrunken so much after 9.5 months of he's got a very low BMI. He has scabies. We're treating him with the scabies right now. We're trying to get him regular sleep. We're working on the mental part of it too, let him know that he's safe, that, he's got family, he's got love, he's got people to take care of him. But we were also able to get his 3 friends out who were arrested with him 2 days after Mohammed. So that was a big part of his recovery, is to not know that he was free, but his 3 friends were still in prison. So now they're all with their families and they're all back home. And, I think that's going to help the most.
I understand that it was reported that Mohammed was interrogated shortly after he was arrested. What did he say happened in that interrogation?
He said that he was beaten in the vehicle on his way to the camp where they take the prisoners. In his case, he was more of a hostage. He was a child and he was blindfolded and taken at gunpoint. Prisoners have rights. Juvenile prisoners, you would expect to see a guardian or a parent or a lawyer. They took him to a military camp where he was asked questions about his whereabouts. And we later found out that they didn't like his answers and that he was beaten into a confession for something that he didn't do out of sheer fear for getting another beating.
Now, under Israeli laws, stone throwing is a very serious offense in the occupied West Bank. If Mohammed had been convicted, he could have served up to 20 years in prison. So I'm curious, what were the conditions of Mohammed's release and where does his case stand now?
Okay, so the lawyers made an appointment with the prosecutor and they came to an agreement that if Mohammed would say he's guilty, a plea deal, that they can release him on what they call suspended sentencing.
So by pleading guilty, that was the only way that he was going to be released, even though he was pleading guilty for something that he says he didn't do.
Yeah. At that point, we didn't care. It wasn't like, a prideful thing to say he did or didn't. The goal was for him to go home to his family. They could have etched it in stone, for all we cared. We said, where do we sign?
Israel is the only country in the world that systematically prosecutes children in military courts. There were 3 other young people that were arrested with Mohammed, who you said were eventually released as well. But the Defense for Children International, or DCI, says that as of September, 350 Palestinian kids between the ages of 12 and 17 were in Israeli prisons. So what do you think that Mohammed's release means for them?
That question is very dear to my heart. This was never been just about Mohammed. We know that there's 300 other Mohammeds in the same situation. We started with Mohammed because we were able to use his citizenship and advocate for him. The other kids aren't that lucky. They don't have that U.S. citizenship. But at the same time, that U.S. citizenship didn't help him much. He was still there for 9.5 months. He was still a juvenile. He wasn't fed better. He wasn't medically taken care of any better than the other kids. They all just looked as bad. So we started with Muhammad, and alhamdulillah, thank God that we got him home. And immediately we approached the families of the other 3 kids who were arrested with him, and were able to get the other 3 kids out with the same stipulations as Muhammad, the same bond, the same fee. And, they were reunited with their families first and taken to the hospital to get checked out. And we drove Muhammad from the house to the hospital where he could see his friends.
And question for you. I mean, I know, since Muhammad is a U.S. citizen, has your family talked about bringing him back to the United States?
Yeah, we're going to bring him back for a couple concerns. Retaliation. We don't want the government there to go after him. He's kind of become a poster boy for child prisoners in the last 9.5 months. Also, his health. He lost a lot of weight. We want to get him stronger and better. But we also want to give him a little bit of a mental break to know that he's sleeping somewhere where, they won't be pounding on his door and it won't be rearresting him. And then, he can go back anytime he sees, fit. But we want to get him to school. We want to finish his education, and we want to get him healthy. He's not healthy enough to travel right now as we speak, but he's slowly going to be getting there.
More with Zeyad after the break. Zeyad, 27 U.S. lawmakers and more than 100 faith-based human rights and civil rights groups were demanding for Muhammad's release in October. Now, when he was finally released a month later, the U.S. State Department said that the Trump administration has, quote, no higher priority than the safety and security of U.S. citizens. What do you think ultimately brought Muhammad home?
So the State Department, that's kind of their motto, that there's no greater concern except for our citizens abroad. Our experience that we had with the State Department, I can tell you that that's not true. I can tell you that the Secretary of State ignored a congressional letter of 27 congressmen and senators. He ignored media. He was asked about it in an interview while he was in Israel. And he said that they're looking through things like that through their consular services and their embassies. He drove by the prison, on his way to Jerusalem and Tel Aviv and all these other places, and never stopped by and checked on Muhammad.
So this is Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who is actually from Florida.
Who's from Florida and is I think a Cuban American, where his parents left the country to come to America because it was a better place for them to be, right? So there should be somewhat of a connection with a Palestinian American who's in Palestine, who's being occupied. And if he can't connect with that sensitivity of being a Floridian and this child is from your state, then you could at least be human enough to recognize a child from your country, from your state, and a torture chamber for 9.5 months, skin boils, scabies, bruises, weight loss. His eyes are sunken in. His face is completely flattened. He has no more cheeks. And on top of that, they wouldn't let his mother, a Puerto Rican, Floridian, an American, who was like the best mother in the world with this kid, not even see him once. And you're talking about, this is happening with your greatest ally and the only democracy in the Middle East. We're talking about an ally that during a government shutdown, you were still funding, but your own federal employees in our country here, you're not funding. So, it's a wake-up call. It's a wake-up call for everybody that as much as Palestine is occupied, that they need to know that, Washington, D.C. is under the same occupation politically.
When Muhammad was imprisoned, your family faced another tragedy. Mohammed's cousin, Saifullah Musallat, was killed while visiting family in the occupied West Bank. Saif was also a U.S. citizen from the Tampa Bay area. He was beaten to death by Israeli settlers in July. I remember when that happened here in Tampa, there was a vigil for him. And there were also a lot of community members, leaders who were calling for an investigation into Saif's killing. He was a beloved member of this community. He owned a local ice cream shop and was only 20 years old. We covered Saif's story on The Take, and I understand that he and Mohammed were very close. In fact, he described Saif as his best friend. I saw a heartbreaking photo of Mohammed sitting next to Saif's tombstone after he was released. How did Mohammed find out about Saif's passing?
So Saif and Muhammad's mom, they're sisters. And, one was taken in February to a prison, and the other one went to go visit his mom and his aunts in Palestine. And he was ambushed and beaten to death by settlers. And as he was dying, the Israeli occupation forces blocked the ambulance from helping him. They blocked the ambulance for 2 hours, and Saifullah passed away. He was murdered. Muhammad, of course, like I said, we had no communication with Muhammad for 9.5 months. We couldn't even write him a letter. So upon leaving the prison, on his way to the hospital, there was a lot of people there waiting for him, including Saifullah's mom and dad, his aunt and uncle. And there was a lot of his friends and a lot of people from the town who were coming there to see how Muhammad was. His father, he's got his son in the car with him and he's taken him to a hospital. He hasn't seen his kid for 9.5 months. But he also didn't want his son to be between 400 or 500 people and somebody tell him about Saifullah. It's his first cousin, their mothers are sisters. But secondly, it was going to be his summer home and his summer job. He was going to be working at the ice cream shop in Tampa.
Oh.
So his dad looked him in the eye and told him, he said, Habibi, you've been gone for 9.5 months. And he had to break the news to him about his cousin. So this is something that happens in Palestine every day, that you're coming home, you're coming to say welcome home to somebody leaving a prison, and that prisoner is telling you, I'm sorry about your loss. My condolences.
It's a lot for a teenager to experience, and I'm really sorry about everything that your family has been through.
He lost his teenhood. I speak to him every day. He talks to me like he's 25 years old now. His innocence, his childhood, it's completely gone.
The U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, said that he asked Israel to aggressively investigate Saif's killing, and that, quote, there must be accountability for this criminal and terrorist act. Both Saif and Mohammed are U.S. citizens again. Did you hear from the ambassador or anyone else in the Trump administration about Saif's killing or even Mohammed's detention?
So the ambassador came to the village. He did post that tweet and called it settler terrorism. He did come to the village and he met with the two fathers, the father of Saifullah and the father of Tawfiq Abdul-Jabbar, the two Americans who were killed in our village, told Ambassador Huckabee that, our kids are gone. We buried them. You guys can't do anything for us. You could go arrest the people who killed them. But our nephew, Muhammad, is in an Israeli prison. You guys can still save him.
And that was in July. And then fast forward to November. And that's when Muhammad is finally released?
Yeah, Thanksgiving Day.
So that's a very long, many months later. And did the family hear anything from Ambassador Huckabee during that time?
Nothing at all. He called the father on the day that he was released and said, I'm glad, he's home. I'm happy for you guys. Congratulations. We didn't want it to take this long, but we're glad he's home.
How do you feel about the fact that it took this long for the United States to do anything about Mohammed's condition and situation in the Israeli prison?
It was painful, we were getting updates every 2 months, every 50 days from the U.S. Embassy about his health. And, it was always bad news, and we heard of all these other things happening there, the beatings. A friend of his died in that prison, a 17-year-old from the same town named Walid. And his body is still in the prison, and they kept him in a freezer or refrigerator. They haven't even released the body to his family. So, we hear about all these horror stories, we hear about sexual abuse, rape allegations, all these things. We just wanted Mohammed home.
And Zeyad, as you mentioned earlier, there are other U.S. citizens who live in your family's village in the occupied West Bank. These are people who could be living in the U.S., but they choose to stay there. And you mentioned that you yourself have spent some of your teen years in the West Bank, and that this is a pretty common thing. Remind us why it is that people still make the choice to live there.
This right here. So this is our kafia. And a lot of people think it's just decoration or a scarf. These symbolize the fishnets that when they used to go fishing in the oceans of Gaza and outside of Haifa and those areas. And these are the leaves of the olive trees, and the lines in between it symbolize the roads that they used to use to travel to the bordering countries. But this has kind of become re-symbolized, instead of this being a fishnet, this has become the cage around all the villages in the West Bank, the huge fences around Gaza. These olive leaves symbolize the harvest that people can't get to these last couple of years because of the settler violence. And these streets or paths that were used to trade and to travel throughout Palestine symbolize an apartheid wall that separates the ocean from the olives now. So, unfortunately, this is past, present, and future right here. It's not just a scarf. And this is why we're so connected to our country, whether we live in America or anywhere else. Our parents and the generations before them, they wanted us to know where we were from, our culture, our religion, our language. And it was an honor. The best thing that my parents ever did for me was sending me there with my siblings. And my siblings are doing it right now with their kids. My newborns, God willing, will be there. And we'll carry on that tradition, and we'll carry on that culture. And we're honored to do that.